friends, real quick. We're on a mission to hit 25,000 subscribers by Halloween, and every single sub, like, and comment helps push The Darkest Hour out to a wider audience. And remember, we never have ads in between our stories. So if you enjoy spooky stories and want to help this haunted little corner of YouTube grow, hit that subscribe button because it truly makes a difference. Thank you. Now, on with the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. There's a difference between something frightening and something evil. When people talk about demons, it's often in half-believed, half-feared tones. But if you've ever stood in the presence of something truly demonic, you know the feeling isn't subtle. It's a force. It can wear a human face, speak in a calm, measured voice, smile in a way that feels wrong, deep in your bones. And when it moves through a room, it leaves more than fear behind. It leaves a weight, a pressure, as if the air itself is watching you. Tonight you'll hear stories of these moments where people came face to face with something not just strange, but malicious. Encounters that leave no doubt that they're standing in the shadow of something we can't explain and may not want to. So, let's get started, shall we? This happened back when I was in college. I was sharing an off-campus apartment with a couple of friends. An older building where the walls were thin enough to hear your neighbor sneeze, but the heat takes an hour to kick in. It was late on a Friday night when my roommate Kelly came home from a thrift store run with a Ouija board. Not a shiny new one. This thing looked old, like the wood had been handled by 100 different people over the years. The letters were faded, though carved in. The planchette was worn and smooth. We weren't really the paranormal types, but we enjoyed a scary movie every now and then. It was cold, we were bored, and our other friend Jamie was over, so we figured, why not? We set it up on the coffee table, sitting on the floor with our knees almost touching. Kelly lit a candle, mostly for effect. The only other light came from the street lamps that were filtering through the blinds. The planchette started slow, the way it always seems to in these stories, circling lazily, answering simple yes or no questions with small, hesitant slides. We laughed a lot at first. Maybe we were uncomfortable, but we were accusing each other of pushing it. Then, about 10 minutes in, the air between each of us, it went cold. Not a draft. This was different. It was like there was a pocket of air right in the center, between our hands, and it was cold. You could feel the edge of it if you moved your arm slightly forward or back. I opened my mouth to mention it, but before I could, the planchette jerked hard to the letter H. What happened next is hard to explain without sounding insane, but the board started spelling words, fast. But they didn't match what we were asking. Kelly would ask, "Who are we talking to?" And it would spit out something unrelated, like lights off. Jamie would ask another question, but instead of answering, the planchette would slide rapidly, almost frantically, to different letters that made no sense in context. It wasn't just random. Some were real words, sentences even. But the conversation, whatever you call it, seemed to be happening without us, like it was talking to someone else entirely. And the cold spot stayed there, between us. At one point, Jamie pulled her hands back to rub them together. The planchette didn't stop. It kept moving under just mine and Kelly's fingertips, still at the same speed, still spelling things we didn't understand. I remember Kelly whispering, "It feels like there's another set of hands here." I nodded. That's exactly what it felt like someone invisible had joined the circle. Their fingertips pressed just lightly enough against the wood to guide it. We asked, "Who else is here?" It paused, and then spelled, "Listen." Kelly asked, "Listen to what?" The planchette slid so fast it scraped against the board. "Not you." The cold started to creep outward then, not just between us, but up our arms, into our shoulders. My stomach dropped like I was on a ride, and I said I wanted to stop. Jamie agreed immediately, but Kelly hesitated. The planchette spelled, "Stay." We all said goodbye at once, pushing it toward the word printed on the board. But instead of stopping, it drifted back to the center. The cold spot was still there. We finally pulled our hands off. The second we did, the temperature between us returned to normal. It wasn't a slow fade, it was just gone. The planchette sat dead still in the middle of the board. None of us wanted to touch it again. Kelly put it back in the box and shoved it into the hall closet. A few nights later, I was watching TV alone in the living room when I heard something from that closet. A faint scraping sound, like wood on cardboard. It stopped as soon as I stood up. When I told Kelly about it the next morning, she laughed, but she didn't open the closet to check. The board stayed in there until the day we moved out. None of us took it with us. I've used a Ouija board twice since then, but nothing like that has ever happened. I still can't explain that cold spot, or why the board seemed to be having a whole separate conversation that we weren't a part of. I rented this place last March, just a 6-month lease while I wrapped up work in the area. It was small, quiet, and backed up into the woods. Honestly, the listing photos made it look forgettable. But the second I stepped inside, something about it felt unique. I don't mean creepy, more like my brain was trying to process the shape of it, and just kept glitching. I even caught myself tilting my head at one point, like that would help. The rooms were normal, at least they looked normal. You could stand in the kitchen and measure everything out, and it all checked. But somehow, standing in it, I kept feeling like I was leaning slightly, or like the floor wasn't perfectly level, even though it was. I brushed it off. New house, new angles, right? For the first week or so, it was small things. I'd put my coffee mug in the sink, come back later, and it would be on the counter. My phone charger moved from the bedroom to the living room, often. Harmless little things that you could explain away, blame a careless mind, unless you live alone and are incredibly OCD. Then it's just you trying to remember if you've finally lost it. The other thing was the clock. Every now and then I'd be mid-task, folding laundry, scrolling my phone, and my brain would blink just for a second, like I'd glance at the clock and it would be 10 minutes later. Not in the I got distracted kind of way, in the I genuinely have no memory of what just happened kind of way. And I'm not talking hours here, just little slices of time missing. A few minutes here, a few there. Enough to notice, especially if you're me. It never happened when someone else was over, only when I was alone. Sometimes the light in the house would change, just slightly, like the color temperature shifted, not a power flicker or shadow, more like someone slid tinted glass in front of the sun for half a second. By the time I blinked, it was gone, or back to the same. And yeah, of course I thought about filming it, but it never lasted long enough. I'd grab my phone and poof, it was over. Every single time. I mentioned it once to a coworker. I was expecting them to laugh, but hoped they wouldn't. Instead, they asked, dead serious, if the house had odd angles. I said no at first. Then later that night, I noticed something. Not a single room had a perfect corner. The walls didn't meet in sharp 90-degree angles. They'd sort of curved, just the tiniest bit. Like a very soft bend you could only catch if you stared long enough. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it, but I also couldn't photograph it. It never looked how it looked, if that makes sense. I could have probably ignored it, but the missing time got worse. One night I was reading on the couch. I glanced at the clock, 9:42. I remember thinking I'd make tea before bed. I put my book down, stood up, and then I was in the kitchen, the kettle already whistling. The clock read 11:17. I don't remember walking there. I don't remember filling the kettle. I just remember I stood up. A few nights later, I woke up at 3:03 a.m. I remember because I thought it was weird. The room was filled with this dim, weirdly flat light. Not bright enough to hurt my eyes, but definitely wrong for the middle of the night. I blinked and it was gone. I rolled over and fell back asleep, but I woke up again, 3:09. There was a cup of tea on my bedside table, still warm. I hadn't made tea before bed. I moved out when my lease ended. Told people it was because the place was drafty. The kitchen was too small. Both true, but not the real reason. Now when someone's telling a weirdest thing that's ever happened to you story, I sometimes bring it up. I tell them about the little house with no corners, where the light would shift, the clock would skip ahead, just enough to notice. And I always finish with the truth that I don't have an explanation for. I was only there for 6 months, but I think I lost more time in that house than I'll ever get back or know. If you're here, I'm sure I don't have to argue about the existence of the spirit world. I saw it with my own eyes firsthand, and I know there's a police report stuffed away somewhere in a North Texas filing cabinet with my name on it. I was a teenager when this happened. I was standing at the crosswalk, waiting on the corner of an intersection. The sun was right overhead, and I was only a few blocks away from shade and my destination. I was wearing headphones, listening to music on my iPod, but because it was so hot outside, it felt like the light was taking forever to change over. An old woman walked right beside me, and I'll never forget the look she had on her face. It was a dead-eyed smile. I looked over at her right as she panned her head over to look at me. She was a lot shorter than me, and the grin stayed perfectly unmoved when she turned towards me. I smiled back and turned my attention back to the passing traffic. I didn't like looking into her eyes, and her being next to me made me feel antsy. I could see that she's still looking over at me. Not wanting to be rude, I took off my headphones and said hi. The smile on her face grew. Her teeth were brown and black as if she'd never heard of a toothbrush. And when she started talking to me, I was caught off guard because she spoke with a thick accent, like she'd come straight from 1700s London. You don't often hear someone talking with an accent like that around this area. She said, "Oi, you're in for a treat, girlie." I said, "No thank you," because I thought she was offering me something. But she tells me, "The treat's not for you, dear, but if you stick around, you can see the show." The things she was saying made no sense, and I was about to politely put my headphones back on, but she gently grabbed my forearm and physically held my arm down and told me I'm going to want to keep those off to really appreciate the show. Her behavior gave me the impression that she was senile. When she grabbed me, it wasn't hard, but her touch sent shockwaves through my body, like her fingers were electrical conductors, snapping me into focusing solely on her. The old woman says, take exactly 4 steps backwards, heel to toe. I ask why, and she says, it's for your own good. I'd do it fast though, Lily. No joke. This little old woman knew my name, and when she said it, alarm bells went off in my head, like I knew I needed to listen to what she was saying and follow it to a T. Somehow I knew my life depended on those next 4 steps, and I'd soon find out how right I was. So I started walking backwards, making sure to measure my steps heel to toe. Still, not knowing why she wanted me to do it, I count 4 paces, asked if I was in the right spot. She curled the tip of her pointer finger to touch the tip of her thumb, like bingo. Then she turned back to face the traffic. She stood at the edge of the curb, close enough for the cars to blow her hair around when they zoomed by. For a moment, I said nothing, because it was the first time I'd really gotten a look at what the lady was wearing, and boy howdy, she had on the flashiest boots I'd ever seen. Red and white cowboy boots. The lining sparkled like there were diamonds in the stitches. White pants and white blazer jacket on top, like a cowboy version of Saturday Night Fever. It was the kind of tacky that you only see with super old wealthy people. It wasn't about having any fashion sense. It was a statement without words. I knew every item that she had was probably worth more than what I'd made in a year. The awestruck only wearing off when I saw the tips of those shiny boots move more off the curb. So seeing this, I think to myself, do I grab her? But in a split second of the thought popping into my head, the old woman spoke to me, in my head. Like even though she was still on the edge of traffic, back turned toward me on a busy intersection, I heard her voice crystal clear, like she was standing next to me again. It said not to move a single inch. So I didn't. I thought to myself, what just... But she had the answer ready for me. Before I knew what to ask, I understood that I wasn't supposed to understand what was going on. I was in the wrong place at the right time, and this entity dressed as an old woman, she was kind enough to give me a peek around the curtain, and it changed my perspective on how the world works. The way she said this next thing, it sounded so poetic. I remembered it later and wrote it down so I'd never forget. She said, "The beast and the beauty are one and the same. Miracles grow from terrible things." The old woman turned around for the final time to face me. The pale blue eyes that were sunk beneath her wrinkles were now glowing black. It looked like her bone structure had physically changed. The elderly woman's gentle face had transformed to a younger-looking one, with sharp, rigid, triangular features. Her chin thinned down to a point, and the age lines all disappeared on her face. She was hauntingly beautiful, ghastly, alluring, like a Disney villain. I knew that she could hear me thinking that too, because a smile stretched across her face. Then I watched her red and white boots step backwards off the curb and the woman vanish into the air, like the curb was a doorway to a place I couldn't see. But as she did this, I hear the sound of tires screeching. I look over to my left just in time to see a green Toyota Camry rear-end the car in front of it. The Camry hit it so hard, it ricocheted onto the sidewalk, balancing on 2 wheels. It blew past me, close enough to smell the burning rubber of the tires. It rolled and hit another row of cars waiting at the red light. It was a huge accident that happened in a matter of seconds. I'm a registered nurse now, but then I guess I was just going off instinct. I immediately started running to the affected cars to check on everyone's condition. If I hadn't have stuck around, I wouldn't have been able to fully recognize the significance of it all. Each moment was a square in a Rubik's Cube, and all the colors would line up a day later, in an undeniable pattern of sequences that changed my internal belief the more I got lost staring into the motif of it all. Because I think I was the only one who saw the woman that day. It wasn't her stepping off the curb that led to the accident, though I do believe she was somehow the start of the chain reaction of events that followed. To the best of my knowledge and understanding, this is what happened. The woman stepped off the curb and disappears at the same time a car is slowing down to take a right turn. He was the last person I checked on because his car received the least amount of damage. He said he'd forgotten something and was turning around to go home. He thought that he was responsible because he slammed on his brakes so he could make the turn. I don't think it would have mattered, though, because the man in the Toyota was having a heart attack. He was a young man, healthy, probably mid-40s, out of the blue. He has a full-on cardiac arrest situation and loses control of his car. He then clips the car in front of him and almost killed me when it went onto the sidewalk. The Camry rolls and stopped after T-boning a van on the other side of the road, and the man having a heart attack died upside down, still seatbelted into his seat. The side of the van was crushed, sandwiched between the Camry and a car in the lane over. When police arrived on the scene, they directed the driver of the van to get out, telling him to crawl out through the back of the van. Their orders seemed to aggravate the man, and he became confrontational to the cops. It's normal to be confused and shaken up after being involved in an accident like that. English also wasn't his first language, but the way he was acting was as if he had no concern with the wreckage. He was only upset by the two officers yelling at him. One of the cops continues to shout directions at him to exit the vehicle, as the other walks to the rear end of the van to try to pry the back doors open. The driver became irate when he saw the cop walk toward the back of the van. When the police and ambulances arrived, I made my way back to the sidewalk, and I'm able to see the side of the van. I see the cop walk around the back and use a tool to prop the door open. When the doors open, the tool the cop was using is dropped on the ground, and he barks something to his partner that makes both officers point their guns at the driver of the van. Both cops are yelling at the man, using their radios to get more cops on the scene. Soon, all 4 roads of this intersection are blocked. There's police activity everywhere, and I come to find out that this car accident had somehow turned into a hostage negotiation. I think that lasted for a few more hours after I left. Later, I'd see it on the news that police had apprehended a human trafficking suspect that was transporting victims in the back of that van. Worst part is I'm pretty sure they weren't adults. For many reasons, I won't forget that day. I was able to witness something bigger than myself. I was able to see that there's a bigger plot we all play a role in. It's like what Shakespeare's "All the world's a stage" quote says. There's a bigger story that we're all a part of, and the show must go on. All we can hope is that the characters we play aren't cast as supporting roles. I've tried to keep this close to me ever since then. Be the best character I can be, spread the most happiness I can so that I don't get cut from the final act. Sounds a little paranoid, yes, and there's probably a lot more meaning and symbolism behind it all. But there's no bad reason to start living better. That's why I'm here, though. Put yourself in my shoes and try to find the meaning behind that day. You rearrange the Rubik's Cube of events and tell me if you found a different way to think about it. This is a story about my brother, Daniel, and how he was possessed. My brother had always been a little different after his accident. Quieter, maybe more serious, but everyone said that was just the trauma talking. He'd been thrown from his motorcycle, knocked unconscious, and woke up in the hospital with a broken leg, 3 missing teeth, and a scar that cut a perfect arc from his ear to his jaw. He'd suffered a concussion, obviously. He said that he didn't remember the crash. That was probably for the best. The first time I noticed something was off, it was his voice. It was about a week after he came home. We were sitting in the living room, half watching TV. He leaned over, not looking at me, and said, "Do you remember the old willow, back by the river?" It wasn't the words, it was the way he said it. His voice had always had this easy, almost lazy tone, like he was half smiling when he spoke. But this, it was deeper, with a weird rhythm, almost like each word had been placed in his mouth before he spoke it. And well, we never had a willow tree by the river. I laughed it off and said, "No." He just nodded, eyes still on the TV, like he hadn't expected me to answer anyway. Over the next few weeks, the changes got harder to ignore. He'd be fine all day, talking, joking, eating dinner with the family. Then night would come, and something in him shifted. He'd get quiet, avoid eye contact, start using phrases that didn't belong to him. Once, I caught him writing in a notebook at the kitchen table around midnight. I asked what he was working on. He turned the book towards me. The words were written in this tight, cramped script I didn't recognize. Not yet ready, too much light. I didn't know what that meant. When I looked up, he smiled, but not with his eyes. "Just a story," he said, but he closed the book before I could ask anything else. There were other things, though, small details that started stacking up. He began locking his bedroom door at night, and I'd hear him talking, but there were 2 voices, the one that wasn't quite his, and the one that was. His handwriting, it had always been a bit messy, but it became precise, formal, cursive almost, except when it wasn't, when it twisted into jagged shapes, and it made my head ache if I looked at it too long. Our parents noticed that something was off, but they didn't want to talk about it. Mom just said, "He went through a lot," and Dad changed the subject. One night I woke up to the sound of my name. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't even loud. It was whispered, just outside my door. "Daniel?" No answer. I opened the door. He was standing there, barefoot, wearing the same clothes he'd gone to bed in. His eyes looked dark, not glowing, nothing crazy, just dark, like his pupils had taken over the entire eye. He said to me, "I'm not supposed to tell you this yet." And then he turned and walked back down the hall. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The thing that finally convinced me that something was really, really wrong was a few months later. We were in the garage, sorting through old boxes. It was late afternoon, sun slanting through the windows, and we were both tired. I made a dumb joke about him being slow because of his leg. Without missing a beat, he looked up and said, in a perfect imitation of our grandfather's voice, "Careful, boy. I taught you better manners than that." Our grandfather's been dead for 7 years. He wasn't just mimicking him. He sounded exactly like him. When I asked him why he said that, how he did that, he blinked like he was waking up and said, "I didn't say anything. What did I say?" I've tried to explain it to myself. Maybe it was brain damage from the accident. Maybe PTSD. Maybe I'm just reading too much into things because I want my old brother back. That's what I thought for a moment anyway. But one night I'd gone to the kitchen for water. It was around 2 a.m., and I saw his door open. That was rare. He usually kept it locked after dark. I glanced inside. He was laying in bed, but it wasn't him. His body was there, still breathing, but he was sitting in the chair in the corner too, watching himself sleep. At least, I think it was him. I jump out of the doorway quickly, out of fear. But I look back, and it's just him laying in bed. No one sitting in the chair. But I know that it looked like him. Same clothes, same scar. The posture was off, and he was too still. I stood there watching my brother just lay in bed. And then I heard my name in that other voice, the one I'd been hearing through his bedroom door. I ran back to my room and locked the door. I didn't tell anyone about that. I didn't even know where to start. How do you explain that your brother might be two people now, and that one of them is evil or dark? I started having nightmares, seeing him with those dark eyes, seeing more than one of him. I'd always wake up sweaty, uncomfortable. One of the last times that anything strange happened in regards to my brother was when I caught him looking at me a little too still. I looked at him. He asked if I'd had any dreams lately. I lied and said no. He smiled, like he knew I was lying. And then, just before he walked out of the room, he said, "You will." It gave me chills. I only lived in that house for another 1.5 years before I got my own place with friends. I still talk to my brother, obviously. And honestly, nothing like this has ever happened again. Now we're normal. Watch TV, eat dinner, argue about nothing. But for a while there, something strange was happening. This happened several years ago when I was 19, living in a basement apartment with my best friend Sam. We both worked late shifts at different jobs, so most nights we'd end up hanging out after midnight, eating whatever was left in the fridge and watching TV. It was winter, so stupid cold, and the night that this happened, a storm had knocked out the power to most of the block. No TV, no lights, no heat. Just the sound of the wind rattling the thin basement windows. Sam went digging through a closet and came back holding a battered cardboard box with a familiar red and yellow Ouija logo. "I think this belonged to my aunt," he said. "She used it at parties back in the 70s. I laughed. "Perfect. Let's see if we can summon Elvis." Obviously, I didn't take these things very seriously. But for fun, we lit a few candles, sat cross-legged on the floor with the board between us. The planchette was the old-school kind, real wood, with a cloudy glass window in the center. And I swear to you, nothing dramatic happened. Nothing at first. Nothing flickered, no temperature drops, no sudden gusts of wind. The planchette moved a little, slow and uneven. We got a handful of jumbled letters, but we couldn't tell if it was because we were shaking or what. Plus, the letters didn't spell anything. But then about 15 minutes in, it spelled something clearly. We both looked at each other, hesitantly. It spelled Luce. Luke, I guessed. Sam shook his head. "No, that's Luce, like loose." We asked more questions, but the planchette barely moved after that. Within a couple minutes, the power came back on, and the whole mood felt ridiculous. We put the board away and went back to watching TV. Sam went to bed, and I stayed up in the living room with the TV on for background noise. I must have drifted off because I woke up to the sound of static. Not just white noise, sharp, loud static, the kind that makes you sit straight up. The screen was full of snow, but the volume was low, like a faint hiss. And in the hiss, I did hear something. It wasn't clear, not at first. It was like someone talking through a wall. Sam, maybe? But after a few seconds, I realized it was a man's voice, and it was repeating the same thing over and over. It was saying, loose, loose, loose. The sound faded when I leaned closer, but it came back as I sat on the couch. I changed the channel, but every station was static. I turned the TV off. The hiss stopped. Over the next week, that kept happening. Not every night, not often enough to make me dread turning the TV on when I was alone, but sometimes it was just the static between stations. Sometimes it was a faint whisper under the dialogue of whatever I was watching, just enough that you'd think you imagined it. Always the same word, always loose. I asked Sam about it, thinking maybe there was a chance that he was messing with me somehow. But he swore that he wasn't doing anything. But he also swore he hadn't heard it. I told myself that it was nothing and I was letting myself get worked up. Maybe my brain was just looking for patterns after the Ouija session. But one night I was flipping through the channels and stopped dead. In the static, just for a second, I saw a shape. It was a face, not a detailed one, just the suggestion of one. Like someone pressing their features into frosted glass. The eyes were dark, too dark. They didn't blink. The moment I saw it, the voice got louder. I yanked the plug from the wall and I sat there in the dark. Sam spooked me from behind. Hey, I saw that. I heard that too. We didn't turn the TV on again for weeks. The last time it happened there, I remember I wasn't even home. I was staying at my girlfriend's place for the weekend, and she lived in a nice apartment with no old electronics. Everything was new, sleek, and quiet. We were laying in bed watching a movie on her laptop. At some point, early in the morning, Sam calls me. Thinking it's an emergency, I answer. Someone just whispered in my ear, dude. I heard it. Loose. I still have no idea what loose means or who it's supposed to be. But it's been years since I've heard anything about it. White noise or static makes me a little uneasy. I was a bank teller in Las Vegas in the mid-'80s. It was a good job, steady, decent pay, nothing too exciting, except for the day that's been stuck in my head ever since. I had worked a late lunch that day. The branch was slow when I got back. We'd had the usual crowd, casino workers, tourists cashing checks, retirees making deposits. I'd been behind the counter for half an hour when he walked in. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it got. Not silent, not movie scene stillness, just dull, like someone had turned down the volume in the room. He commanded attention simply by being. He didn't run in, didn't shout, didn't even glance around like most people do. He just walked up to my window with this stiff, deliberate pace. Every step the same length. I remember thinking it was like watching a wind-up toy. Mechanical. No wasted motion. He slid a note under the glass. I remember the exact words because it was short. Put all the money in a bag. No alarm. I looked up at his face. and my stomach dropped. I've seen plenty of people high. Vegas in the 80s was full of them. Meth, coke, booze, you name it. You learn the signs. Jittery hands, erratic eyes, that strange mix of focus and chaos. This wasn't that. His eyes were bad. Not bloodshot or glassy, just empty. No light, no recognition, no human flicker. Like looking into a mannequin's painted-on pupils. And he didn't blink, not once. His skin was pale, like it had been drained of color all at once. There was no sweat, no twitching, no sign that he was nervous. His breathing didn't change. I remember my hands were shaking as I started counting out the cash. He didn't watch my hands or the money, though. His gaze stayed locked on my face, unblinking, like he was studying me or something. And then I noticed the way he was standing. His feet were planted exactly shoulder-width apart. His arms hung at his sides, not in a relaxed way, but like he was waiting for a signal. The way his chest rose and fell was perfectly even. When I slid the money towards him, he grabbed it right away, but he just stood there. I got this horrible feeling inside, and I can't describe to you, but every horrible thought crossed my mind. I felt like I was dying, like everyone was dying, that Earth was rotten. I saw the corners of his mouth pull back, but nothing else in his face moved, not his eyes or cheeks. And the smile, it was wide. My first thought was that it almost looked like a mask. He kept that look planted on his face. He took the bag, turned, and walked out. Same exact pace as before, same even steps. And I felt like I could breathe. All of that negativity washed away. The doors to the branch are these heavy, thick glass ones, and they slam shut every time someone comes or goes, always. But when he left, I didn't hear them close. I didn't hear them at all. It was as though he just walked through them. By the time our security guard got to the street, he was gone. The police came, took my statement. I told them everything I just told you, minus my personal thoughts that the man might be the devil himself. Obviously, they wouldn't believe that, nor would they be able to do much with that information. They said that he probably slipped into a casino crowd before anyone noticed. Maybe they're right. But I've thought about him for nearly 40 years now. I've seen desperation. I've seen addicts and drunks, people so strung out they barely remember their own name. But what I saw that day wasn't desperation, and it wasn't drugs. It was something wearing a man's face. I've only used a Ouija board once in my life. It was at a friend's apartment in college, on the second floor of a building that always smelled like someone else's dinner. 5 of us were there. We'd pushed the coffee table aside, sat cross-legged on the carpet, and passed around a bottle of cheap wine until our teeth looked a little bit stained in the candlelight. Once proper buzzed, someone produced the board from the back of a closet. Creased lid, corners taped. It looked like an old Halloween decoration. I wasn't a believer. I don't think any of us were. Not really. We were bored, maybe, and curious. Felt like a dare without consequences sort of thing. We started with the usual questions of, is anyone there? What's your name? The planchette didn't do anything. One of my friends said we needed to refocus, that we shouldn't have drank before, that they read that was bad or something. So we closed our eyes, took a deep breath, and continued to ask questions. The planchette actually crept. It was suspicious. We were looking at each other, sort of rapid fire, wondering, who's the culprit? I was thinking of excusing myself. I suddenly didn't like that it was moving. But then it changed. The little pointer steadied, like someone more sure of themselves had taken over. It slid cleanly, without a hitch. Month, day, and year. October 17th, 2024. We all laughed uncomfortably. What's supposed to happen? Someone asked. We waited, but nothing. The planchette sat in the middle of the board like a dead moth. Someone made a joke about my future wedding date. Someone else said it was probably when I'd finally pay them back for pizza. They were targeting me because I'd asked the question. But my question didn't warrant a date, did it? I just said, tell us something we don't know. We eventually moved on to music and snacks, talking about who liked who, what we were doing that month, all that stuff. But even through it all, I still kept thinking about that date. It stayed in my mind. It didn't sit in my memory like something trivial. It wasn't a novelty I could misplace. It sat with weight, like a phrase you can't remember where you heard, only it repeats itself when you're doing the most ordinary things, folding shirts, rinsing dishes. The date would flicker up, whole and exact. I never had to reach for it, it was just there. I told myself that it was nothing. You notice what you decide to notice. But then it started appearing in little corners of life that you don't control. I mean, the microwave would say 1017, receipt total 1017. I'd get a new employee badge, and the last 4 digits would be 1017. A news site I checked every day posted an article with a timestamp of 10:17 a.m., and I stared at it for far too long, longer than the headline deserved. I walked past a mailbox tag once, Unit 1017, and I felt my chest drop the way that you do when you miss a step in the dark. This feeling was constant. I didn't live in a cascade of 1017s, but it appeared often enough to feel pointed, like being tapped on the shoulder by nothing in particular. I told my mom about it once on the phone. Not the Ouija part, just the date seemed to follow me around. She said, well, remember it and call me when it happens, so I can say I told you so when it's nothing. She had a way of taking the edge off, making me not worry. I could hear her kettle click in the background. Electric, squat. She'd bought it because a friend said it was faster than the stove. You know you read meaning into things when you're anxious, she said. So try not to feed it, okay? Her voice did that soft drop on okay, like she was placing the word into my hand. Years rolled by. The date stayed where it had always been, like a splinter under the skin. Every October 17th came and went without incident. I'd wake up the next day and feel equal parts silly and relieved. I learned to let the sight of it pass through me, on clocks, receipts, table numbers, tiny coincidences that I could step around. I didn't stop noticing, but I stopped asking what it wanted. In college, I found that I was closer to my mom than I'd ever been. I saw her whenever I could. She had a way of filling a room with warmth without doing anything special. Tea, an apple slice on a plate, the porch door cracked for air. When I stayed over, we'd sit in our socks and watch whatever was going on, talking through commercials of whatever was on TV. She kept a recipe box with her handwriting on index cards, neat and looping letters that looked exactly like they had when I was a kid. She saved voice messages, even when they were just me saying I'd be late. It's nice to have your voice around, she'd say, when the house is quiet. She was sweet. When October 17th, 2024 finally got close enough to be a month on my calendar, I found myself waiting without meaning to. Not with dread exactly, with a kind of patient curiosity. I didn't want to admit to it. It was a Thursday. I worked from home in the morning, answering emails, ate the rest of a container of soup that tasted fine until I read the label and saw that the serving size was more than one. I sent a joke about the date to a group chat. If I vanished today, it was the demons, LOL. Someone sent back a skull emoji. Another sent a screenshot of their clock at 10:17 with a sideways eye emoji. My mom called around 3. "Hi, darling," she said, the way she always did. She asked about work. I asked about the neighbor's new dog, the one that howled like a flute. Her words, not mine. We talked about nothing in particular. In the background, I could hear the electric kettle hum. "I'll make tea and call your aunt," she said. "She'll want to tell me how I'm using the wrong kind of honey again." She laughed. That soft, breathy laugh that made me laugh too. "You sound good," she said, like she was noting a weather change. "Call me this weekend? I might make that stew you like." We hung up. I stood in the kitchen longer than made sense, phone still in my hand. I guess I was feeling relieved that the day had already given me something good. By evening, I'd almost stopped thinking about it. I watched a dumb show and folded a towel wrong and refolded it. I put my phone face down on the couch cushion. When it buzzed, I let it go a second, and then I picked up without looking at the screen. "Hello?" It was my dad. He sounded like the phone line was a long hallway, and he was at the other end. Not sure which room he was calling into. "Hey," he said. And then my name, like a test. He didn't say hello. Nobody says hello like that when something's wrong. He started and stopped like he'd hit a doorway that he hadn't seen. She fell. In the kitchen. They think it was her heart. I stood. I don't remember deciding to. I walked toward the door because I needed something to move. He told me he'd been in the yard doing work, had his headphones in. A neighbor came running over, said there was a smoke alarm going off. The paramedics came quickly, he said. A heart attack. In the kettle, it started a small fire on the countertop. I don't remember what I said. I remember the shape of the quiet after we hung up, though. I remember turning my phone over and seeing the recent call list. The time next to my dad's phone call. 10:17 p.m. We're very good at bending the world to fit shape when we need to. And we're very good at telling ourselves that we meant to call, we meant to leave earlier, we meant to say more, say anything else at all. I stood in my own kitchen and put my hand on the counter because it was something that held. I could feel my knees going weak. Without that countertop, I was jello. I looked at the microwave clock and turned away before I could see the numbers. In the days that followed, the moments stacked and unstacked like there was a hand somewhere rearranging them. The neighbor's casserole, wrapped in foil, the couch with its too clean blanket, the recipe box on the table. I found the stew card, her handwriting neat and certain, salt and bay leaf listed in a row of ingredients that always tasted like her house. A yellow sticky note at the bottom in smaller letters. Start the kettle first, so you have something warm while you chop. I pressed my thumb to the pencil impression and felt the urge to call and ask her what kind of honey she liked now, if she'd changed her mind. There's paperwork for everything. People will hand you envelopes and say take your time and mean it and not mean it. There's appointments and a new weight to your own name when you say it to strangers. I learned the way a room changes when you speak out loud the fact of a person's absence. My dad told the story of the night in small pieces, each time shaving off an edge to make it smoother to carry. tea," he'd say, like a period. And I'd see the kettle again, and I'd check the clock without meaning to. He told me later that the paramedics had a time that they wrote down that wasn't the time I saw on my phone. He said the neighbor was the one who took the kettle off the base. He said the smoke alarm chirps differently when it's steam and not smoke. He was trying to do everything in his power to make me feel like I wasn't responsible, like I hadn't predicted something terrible. And I appreciate him for that. I really do. And for what it's worth, the date stopped showing up after that. I didn't see 1017 on the microwave the way I used to. But now, for a completely different reason, I'd never forget that day. You can tell yourself it meant nothing. A coincidence that learned how to walk beside you. A trick of attention. Maybe that's the safest place to set it down. I know what it looked like to carry it for years, and I know what it felt like when it landed. Now, sometimes late at night, when my apartment is as quiet as it gets, I'll play her old messages just to hear her say hello. My phone marks them with dates and times. I haven't touched a Ouija board since that one time in college. I kept the story to myself for years, partly because I didn't want to be the person who believed in something I couldn't explain, and partly because there's a tenderness you feel for your own grief that makes you guard it from other people's explanations. The board didn't give me a warning I understood. It didn't tell me what to do, who to hold on to, where to be. It handed me a date and left me to decide whether to carry it. I carried it. It arrived on time. If you ask me what I believe now, I tell you I don't know. I know there was a night in a second-floor apartment with bad carpet and a board that spelled a future I couldn't read. I know that there was a Thursday years later that looked ordinary when I wrote it down, but it doesn't feel that way anymore. I don't think the board was telling me what would happen. I think it was telling me when I would have to live with it, the inevitable. And I do. I live with it. Some nights it feels like carrying a date written on paper that strong hands won't let me tear. Other nights it's simple. Make tea, stir the stew. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining me, whether it's your first time or you're a regular. Your support means the world over here. We've got brand new episodes every Friday night. Keep those eyes open for those deep sleep videos. And of course, subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. Special thanks to the Darkest Hour channel members, Lori TESDAHL, Sarah Marie, Robert Bailey, T. COLTDADDY Eagle, Mallory Dominguez, Carrie Watkins, Pilar TREDEN WIXSON, Larry Hill, Ripley, JOJO STARCHER, Mary Patrick, Debbie LAFRENIERE, Julie Bourdelais, Jennifer BECK, MARINA LACHNER, May Hamilton Home, Evan Pratt, Mary Hineline, Katharine Yes.ImtherealKatie Isabelle, Landshark, Danielle Hecht, Veronica Mckiernan, Keziah Pietersen, Amber Baker, Khris Lauzon, Kara Geos, Marvin Allen, Forgotten Ruins TV, Raven Wolf, Carlos, Stacia Gillette, Nate Black, Jill Harper, Kathy Balkenbush, and Cosmic Chick. Big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to all of our patrons: Tracy S., Mary H., Tanya F., Tamara K., Monica L., Zoe Watt, Shelley B., Donald C., Marion T., Rat Girl, Alicia S., Aaron G., Nikki H., Mr. Revenant, Naz K., Brendan G., Paul T., Nicholas C., Tony P., Lizanne, Arlene F., Adrian, T.F. Parham, Jason G., Lori T., and Bobo Jenkins. If you want to support The Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining our Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, Amanda, darkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour, YT. Stay spooky.